and a pleasure for me to introduce Wendy Hofman. We go back a little ways. She and her husband, Eric, have been serving at Bongolo Hospital in Gabon, West Africa, as full-time medical missionaries since 2008, basically, when she finished her residency. She currently serves as the director of the eye service and also the director of the residency program, which she began. And she's a wife and mother of 3 children. Her youngest, Hannah, is 7 months old and is with her here today. Her husband, Eric, is back in Gabon holding down the fort with her other 2 children, which are 3 and 4. Right? Eric works in accounting he's an actuary, right? Okay, whatever an actuary is. I think it's an accountant on steroids. So, Wendy is originally a Seattle native, but did her residency at the University of Minnesota, which is where we came into contact with one another. I had the opportunity to work with her in the operating room when she was a senior resident, and we shared a bond that year because that same year our family was getting ready to go serve full-time in Indonesia. So we had that common bond of both leaving the country the same year, basically. Since then, we've stayed in touch with them through their newsletters, and if any of you are interested after you hear her talk and keeping in touch with what they're doing, I'm sure she'd be happy to put you on their email newsletter list so you can get updates on what they're doing, and also through their association with Global Eye Mission. It's been exciting to follow what God is doing through them in Gabon, and it's truly remarkable what's happened there. They basically have started from the ground up a new long-term eye ministry at Bongolo Hospital, which had never had a full-time ophthalmologist before. Is that correct? Yeah. And the goal of the ministry is not only to restore physical sight, but also to share the light of Christ with those they serve. And then, as I mentioned, she had started a residency program, has trained 1 African resident already, and is in the process of training her second, and has been with us here this morning. Her resident's with us at the academy, but I guess she's not here yet. And then her husband, Rob, Bintu's husband, Rob, is a pilot that works at Bongolo as well. The eye ministry continues to grow, and one of the things as I was asking Wendy for some information about what they were doing there was impressive. Their eye unit, as small as it is, now represents 70% of the cataract surgery done in Gabon, in all of Gabon. And there's how many ophthalmologists? 24 ophthalmologists altogether in the entire country, and they've got an attending and 1 resident, and they're doing 70% of the cataract surgery in Gabon. So, impressive. And they're not in the capital city. They're actually several hours out of the capital city. God has really blessed their efforts, and I think it is a wonderful example of how, if we open ourselves to God's call and are obedient to His call, how He can use us in faithful service to build His kingdom. As Stan had mentioned, Wendy is the 2015 Artemis Award winner for this year, so congratulations for that. Well deserved. And just in closing, when I asked Wendy, is there anything else special you'd like me to share about your ministry? She said, well, quote, just that we really want this ministry to have an eternal impact, not just in restoring physical sight. So with that, I'd let Wendy share with us about what their work is and how things have been going and what God's been doing in Gabon.
One of the things that's really fun about this is that I've not even met Ben Roberts, but he's sitting right here, and he taught me how to remove silicone oil over an email, and I have been doing that. So I called my talk For the Least of These because it's right out of the passage in Matthew 25 where Jesus is talking about the parable where the king will reply, I tell you the truth, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me. And not that the people that I work with are the least of these, but to some degree they're poor and forgotten by the world, and Jesus died for each of them. The greatness of His love for them is what keeps us there, and we've been there for 6 years, and it's a fairly long time. Sometimes we, obviously think about coming home, but one of the things that my mentor Glenn Strauss said to me one time was that you'll burn out if you rely on your love for the people. That just happens over time, over years of service. And what really is gonna keep you there is looking at God's love for you and your love for God. And when you love God, you see His love for others, and that's what will get the fire burning and keep you there. So this is the front porch of the eye clinic. This is it looks like that pretty much every Monday morning at least. It's almost as busy the other mornings, but the patients all come in the morning and they just wait to be seen. There aren't any appointments other than for surgery. So my husband and I, this is kind of our timeline. In the summer of 2008 is when we started, and Eric quit his job. I finished residency. Then we went to language school in Switzerland and learned French. We were there for 5 months. And then in 2009, we went to Mercy Ships. That's where I met Dr. Glenn Strauss, and he taught me the M6 technique, the manual small incision cataract surgery technique that's so useful and accurate, just a great technique for missions. And then in May, we arrived at Bungalow Hospital. When I got there, so I had always been interested in short-term missions in college. I went overseas with Wycliffe and with the Baptist mission board, kind of. And then I went to Honduras 3 different times with the Christian Medical and Dental Association in medical school and internship. And I had just been praying about whether God would want me to be involved in repeated short-term missions or maybe long-term missions. And it took me a while to get to the point where I was okay with the idea of long-term missions. That just kind of seemed like stepping off the end of the world to me. But I found out about Samaritan's Purse's post-residency program. They have a program where they take physicians that are right out of residency and they pay for them to do mission work at a hospital somewhere in the world for 2 years. And one of the greatest barriers in my mind to doing that was the finances. So that to find this program was really enabling. We contacted them, and they identified they're connected with maybe 150 mission hospitals around the world, and they identified 5 that really could use an ophthalmologist. And my husband and I prayed about it and felt like God wanted us to go to Gabon. The program with Samaritan's Purse is just 2 years, and so they're not a long-term sending organization. At the end of the 2 years, we spent some time praying and reflecting and felt like God was not calling us back to the U.S. and wasn't calling us anywhere else in the world, and so He must want us to stay. So that's what we did. And the organization that started the hospital at Bungalow is the Christian and Missionary Alliance. We had grown up from various faith backgrounds, but we've been really pleased and blessed to be part of the Christian Missionary Alliance, and we switched to be under their umbrella at that time. This is what it was like in Switzerland. It's a contrast to what you'll see in Gabon in a minute. This is Africa Mercy with Mercy Ships with Glenn Strauss, that we were there for 3 months. This is where Gabon is located. So it's right on the equator. It's in tropical forest, jungle, and I like to say it's in the armpit of Africa because it's kind of, in the crook, and it's kind of hot and sweaty and stinky maybe at times. But it's beautiful. It has some of the prettiest national forests and preserves of anywhere in the world. But tourism's not developed there at all, so it's really hard to see any of it. This is Bungalow Hospital. So instead of building up, we build out because we don't have the contractors and technology and equipment and supplies to build out, first of all, and second of all, we have the land. So Gabon is a country of just 1.5 million people. It's relatively small. It's about the size of Colorado. That mission plane there is how we get back and forth from our hospital to the capital city. Most of the time it's 350 miles. And it probably takes 8 to 10 hours driving, but it's so much better in the mission plane because the roads are not very pleasant, especially for our kids that get car sick. Oops. So there's us standing at the equator and how the Africans get around. before this bridge was built, you had to drive your car onto a boat to cross the river. This is right outside the hospital, and patients would sometimes die on the other side of the river because the boat to cross the river wasn't available. But the bridge has been there since before we got there. So the hospital the site of the hospital was initially just a church planting endeavor by the Christian Missionary Alliance in the 1930s. And then it was in 1977 when the hospital was started by David Thompson. He's a general surgeon. And that's somewhat what it looks like. Patients, there's no hospital cafeteria or anything. Patients bring a guardian, somebody to take care of them and cook for them. And there's open cooking areas where they build fires and cook over an open fire most of the time. So we fix our eyes on not on what is seen, but what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. And obviously, we've been talking about this, but that's why we're here. I mean, the restoration of sight is a fantastic thing, and Jesus certainly modeled healing and telling the good news at the same time. But the good news is going to have an eternal impact. It's, when we're going to be in heaven a long time, and that's where we want to make our primary difference. Being in Gabon has really been a faith journey for us, and I heard a pastor say recently that if you want to encounter God, you need to leave your comfort zone. And what that does is it helps us give up control, and it requires us to believe in the supernatural. And one of the things that my husband's always reminding me of is that unless the Lord builds the house, it's builders labor in vain. So we really don't want to trust in our own abilities. We want to rely on God's power for what we're doing. This is the outside of the eye clinic, and when I come up, I always see all these heads just kind of poking up over the edge of the railing, and walk up there and kind of walk the gauntlet as I'm going into the eye clinic, just another kind of devotional point about this is that when we see the crowds of people that we could be addressing and ministering to, one of the things that I want to remember is that Jesus didn't heal nearly as many people as he could have, because his main goal was to spread the gospel. And I think that's one of the reasons that Jesus didn't want the whole world to know every time he healed somebody, because he didn't want to spend all his time healing sickness. He wanted to do that, but that's also why when he was in Capernaum in the Gospel of Luke, the people wanted him to stay and kind of be their resident healer, I think. But he said, no, I got to go someplace else. I got to go share the gospel. And it's a good reminder that we have to sometimes say no to the good in order to achieve the better. And if we do I need? Okay. If we don't say no, sometimes we're probably letting other people set our agenda. For us at the eye clinic, in choosing ourselves how to spend our lives, one of the things that means is that the people that are on the porch up there, we saw the picture from the porch perspective earlier. They hear the gospel for about 30 minutes in the morning when they get there. So we have a chaplain/receptionist who shares a message every morning, and that time is dedicated for that purpose. And the rest of the staff spends time in the chapel with the other hospital staff of the other departments during that time, and they listen to a devotional message too. I think probably you've all heard some of these statistics. There's in all of Africa, there's one ophthalmologist per every 1 million people. In rural Africa, it's per every 10 million people. Gabon has a low population, but it's still, there's so much blindness that's preventable or treatable. The way that we are really going to make a difference on that level is by training, right? One person can't do all that much, but so this is the first resident that I trained, Dr. Elise Barua. She's from the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and so he came, and it's certainly one of the best things that we've done since we've been there, and you know, he's a believer, and he did over 800 cataract surgeries during his residency, and 200 other surgeries. We do a lot of trabeculectomies, glaucoma surgery. Glaucoma's really a terrible problem there. And these are pictures of Dr. Bintu Peterson, and this is when she got her letter of acceptance to the residency program, and this was her white coat ceremony. And this is a picture to show my former resident teaching my current resident. So the patient under that table is my great-grand patient. This is Dr. Richard Johnston. He came out 18 months or 2 years ago and taught me how to use the Millennium that we have to do some posterior vitrectomy, which I'm not great at yet, but Ben tells me I'm the retina specialist of Gabon, so I better get used to it. I try to teach my clinic staff too. This is me trying to teach them refractions. So I have 4 nurses, and so when I got there were 3 nurses. Now there are 4 nurses, 2 nurses aides, a chaplain receptionist, a housekeeper, and Dr. Elise and my resident. So we're growing. This is what the cataracts look like there. Very common to see that. We often see patients that are blind in both eyes to the level of light perception or hand motion. Just more pictures of that, the eye clinic staff and patients that are excited after having their cataract removed. I shared at the Artemis Awards some funny stories, but there was a man that we took off his patch, and he looked at his wife and he said, "You're old." And she looked back at him and said, "Well, speak of yourself, you're old too, buddy." You know. And another one, they took his patch off and he looked down at himself and he said, "You let me leave the house wearing this?" But there was another lady that was, this last week before we left, we took the patch off and she was running around the room, rejoicing and just saying, "I can see. It's really true. I can see." In general, the Gabonese aren't that expressive. Culturally, they are usually afraid to show joy because they think that whatever they're happy about will be taken from them. But we do get some exceptions like that. That's what the operating room and clinic look like. We do pediatric glaucoma surgery. I think we're the only ones in the country. This man's name was Samuel, and he's a retired evangelist, he said, but he's actually not retired because he came to our clinic on the day that we received this YAG laser, and he needed a YAG. So he said, I need to be able to see well with both eyes. I have to be able to read the Bible to share with other people, and so he just kind of took it as a matter of course that God had provided, a $10,000 instrument on the day when he arrived. We see pediatric glaucoma. I've been trying to learn trabeculotomy and goniotomy, but that wasn't part of my residency. This man is, he came, he had really terrible glaucoma. One eye pressure was 70 and had been no light perception for years, and we did an evisceration for him. And the other eye, the pressure was 50, and he could still see with that eye 20/20. And so we did a trabeculectomy for him, but he was at the eye clinic for a couple weeks, and the last day, this was the last day before I saw him, before he left, and he said, I used to occasionally go to church with my family, but 2 weeks ago I received Christ into my heart, and now I found a new purpose in life, and now my wife and child and I pray together every night. He said that with a huge smile, and I've seen him since, and he's doing great. This is a child who had ptysis, and we gave him an artificial eye, he was just, his entire interaction with the outside world was changed. This will allow him to go to school, get married, have a job. This man had chronic urinary incontinence and partial hemiplegia and was blind in both eyes. And he came to the hospital the first time when my husband and I were in the U.S. for a short stint. When he found out, this was before my resident graduated, when he found out that I wasn't there, he didn't go take care of his incontinence and his hemiplegia with any of the other resources of the hospital. He just went home, he said. And then when he came back a couple years later, we said, "Why did you do that?" And he said, "Well, it really doesn't matter until I can get my eyes fixed." So, what we do for eyes is important to patients. So we've seen a lot of mucoceles, mucopioceles there. At least I never saw it in my residency, but we've had probably 5 or 6 cases since I've been there. This man has leprosy and a cataract. So for the leprosy, I just sent him to our internal medicine department. But for the cataract, we removed the cataract, and he did fine. He didn't have any of the other sequelae, really, ocular leprosy. This lady was one of our first to receive a pair of eyeglasses that we produced at Bungalow Hospital. We've had some trouble with our electricity. It's the voltage has not been clean. We have surges and brownouts all the time, and so I bought an edger, a machine that cuts prescription crude round lenses and cuts them to the shape to fit the frame that the patient chooses, so that we can do the right eye different from the left eye and put astigmatism in and rotate it correctly if they need it. But anyway, the electricity has destroyed those machines a couple of times, and so right now we're not doing that, but we have 2 on a container that are supposed to arrive next month, and so I'm hoping that we'll be able to start producing eyeglasses again. We have a lot of donated eyeglasses, and what we do, what ideally we want to do is to take those donated glasses, pop out the lenses, and use the frames with the lenses that we cut. So, but this lady, she was really happy with her glasses. She said, "I can see all the way to the river." This was Dr. Elize's first M6 case that he did all by himself. This is an M6 video, and I'll just let you watch it while I give a little devotional about it. Jesus said that he came to give recovery of sight for the blind. In Luke 4:18, he said that it was one of the first times that he proclaimed who he was, and he was quoting a passage in Isaiah 61:1, and he was quoting it from the Septuagint, I think, and that's why when we look in our Bibles in the 2 passages, they're not exactly the same. The passage in Luke says recovery of sight for the blind. The passage in Isaiah says to proclaim release from darkness for the prisoners. And to Jesus, these 2 ideas were interchangeable, because both were talking about freeing people not just from physical blindness, but also spiritual blindness or darkness. To be spiritually blind is to not be able to recognize God when you encounter him. So I think that spiritual blindness is really the scariest thing in the world, potentially. You're all distracted. This is Dr. Glenn Strauss operating, so I don't have any videos of my surgeries, I don't think, but it's a short video. He does this in 5 minutes. I take a little longer, but so spiritual blindness is when you encounter God and don't know it's him, or you don't know that you have need of him, and you do. And so I think that we as ophthalmologists, we could become spiritual ophthalmologists. And in fact, everyone can do that. You don't have to be an ophthalmologist to become a spiritual ophthalmologist. You just help open the eyes of people who are blind spiritually. And we can do that in our own lives. It starts by believing that the supernatural is common. And just as Jesus taught that God is in the business of seeking and finding lost things, we know that God is reaching out to us in many ways and often. And that's part of his supernatural work in our lives. He does a can opener capsulotomy. You just rotate the lens out of the bag. That wound is a funnel shape. It's 6 to 7.5 millimeters posteriorly, and in the cornea it's a little bit larger, 1.5 millimeters larger. There's visco between the nucleus and the endothelium. And it's really a hemodynamic egress of the nucleus so that it doesn't touch the endothelium. You depress the wound and it just slides right out. There shouldn't be any pulling involved. Cornea remains nice and clear. If we don't recognize God when we encounter him, we're not only deprived of a vision of loveliness looking at him, but just like physical blindness, we really can't take care of ourselves, work, or take care of others, at least on the spiritual level. For those that haven't been saved by Christ, this spiritual blindness is even more terrifying because it leads to eternal darkness. And to be so blind that you can't see this is coming, and also you can't see what would keep you from that fate, really would panic anyone if they knew their danger. And so I know that, I don't know how many of you see patients that are blind to that level physically, to hand motions or light perception. But when I see that, I'm moved by compassion. I want to do this for them, on a physical level. But I also want to do that for them on a spiritual level. So I want them to be able to see in both levels, just like Jesus was talking about, recovery of sight for the blind and release from darkness for the prisoners. There you have it. That wound, about 10% of the time it requires one stitch. Most of the time it doesn't. That's what my husband does. This is Gabonese money. He does this in French, as we do everything in French. That's the common language. This is a recent picture of our team, and there's about, 7 or 8 physicians on our team, and there's nurses and support personnel doing things that the doctors wouldn't or couldn't do. That's our home. It's really nice. We replaced the screens so there aren't nearly as many bugs that get in anymore, although we still have geckos climbing on the walls, and it's hot. We don't have air conditioning in the houses, although we do in the operating room. And we recently got a grant from USAID for $600,000 to build a new eye building because we're crowded where we are and we want to be able to expand our service. We're still missing $200,000 to completely finish that, and then we don't have any funds yet to furnish it, but we're moving ahead and trusting that God will provide. It's going to be about 12,000 square feet, which is huge for us. I mean, it's it's going to be amazing. I've never done this before, so. We just started our village outreaches too. We hadn't been doing village outreaches because we have so many patients present to us that our surgical backlog is often 6 months, and but we just felt God leading us to start doing some of that, and we just did the first one. It was really encouraging. We found a couple of people that were only 10 miles away and they were blind in both eyes and they just didn't have any money, and so they hadn't come. They don't have the money for the taxi to come 10 miles, much less the surgery, and so we're going to provide free surgery for them. And it was just really neat to get into the patients' homes and see what their lives are like, and it's definitely a morale booster for the team and for what we do. I heard a message by a pastor named John Soper, and he was talking about Exodus 4, where God tells Moses a miracle that Moses will perform to convince Pharaoh that Pharaoh's supposed to let the Israelites go. Moses is supposed to throw his staff on the ground and it becomes a snake, and the point of Pastor Soper's message was that this was just Moses' regular shepherding staff. This is what he used every day to make sheep move along. And And it was just what he had in his hand, but it was to become the staff of God, and that's what it was called. And Pastor Soper says that God has a remarkable habit of taking whatever happens to be in our hands and using it in unbelievably mighty ways, if and only if we will simply yield it to him. So Moses obeyed and let God use what was in his hands. So the obvious question is, what's in our hands? And for ophthalmologists, it's more than just a staff. You know, we have so much in our hands, and if God can do what he did with Moses' plain staff, what will he do with your keratome? So this is the lady that one of the people that we found at the village there that day. And these are patients, some of the patients that have received Christ at the eye clinic in the last year. And that's a current picture of my staff in front of our house. That's our house. This is this is after Hannah was born. So that's our 7-month-old. And we're all relatively sedate because we're sleep deprived now. But this is before she was born. This was our New Year's Eve party. That's our family. So 4 years old, 3 years old, and now 7 months. And Eric, the love of my life, but he's not here right now. And he made me a Valentine's card out of a picture of a pothole because we didn't have Hallmark. So here's some contact information if you want to be in touch with us. And I think that's all. So thank you.